Hey y'all. I wanted to do a little capstone project for my harvest content that I've made recently, and I wanted to compare traditional harvest farming with crop rotation, the new Atlas Keystone. So, I have done a lot of harvest farming in the past. Last week I did easily 1,000 or so maps doing just traditional harvest, and I found it was pretty good consistent currency, and I wanted to see how it compared to crop rotation here this league. Now, I want to preface this by saying that the sample size is always going to be an issue when we're talking about path of exile data, and equally with sample size, there's RNG that's going to affect how data looks with just one test. And so, in this case, there is definitely some notable differences between what I've actually experienced myself with crop rotation as well as what I actually saw here in this test. And so that's always something to keep in mind, meaning you shouldn't take everything here as the end all be all, but I'm going to keep it as statistical as possible just to make sure I'm not jumping to conclusions about anything. And at the end of the day, it's a game. Just play it however you want. And most of the time with PoE, you're going to make currency as long as you're not throwing it away doing stupid stuff. I did think, however, that my first initial experience running several hundred maps with crop rotation this league had been a little too lucky. And I didn't want to look through these rose tinted glasses and say it's the best strat for Harvest. And so this is kind of to dispel that, or at the very least to demonstrate that there might be another side to it. And obviously, farming without actually collecting data, I can only give anecdotal evidence, which is not very good in the sense of PoE currency tracking. So, without further ado, let's get into the data. So, I farmed 60 maps using traditional harvest and 60 maps using crop rotation. And they were all kept as similar as possible, meaning I rolled maps with 22% pack size and at least 78% quantity. And they were all T16 dunes. The investment was a bit different because I had to buy different sextants for each. So traditional harvest, you want to maximize your targeted plant, and so you have to buy yellow sextants, which cost a lot more. Obviously, also running magic pack size and scarabs, just rusted, same old. And as far as the map device craft goes, it was around 60 maps, so 12C a map. Total investment was 336 or 3036 chaos, and these are the results. So in total life force, we got 156k, which totaled alone to 5,926 chaos. This equaled to 2.8k chaos in profit when we subtract the costs. And that also meant around 0.2 divines per map. This is honestly kind of what I expected out of traditional harvest, and when we look at some of the other statistics, it also makes a decent bit of sense. So I tracked the amount of T3 and T4 plants that I got. This T4 plant count is a bit higher than what I expected, as well as compared to crop rotation. And frankly, I don't think this is very normal. However, I guess it's balanced by the fact that I didn't get a single Sacred Blossom in actually all 120 maps. Um, you're getting at least 1.4 T3 per plot, which is quite a decent value, honestly, when you're considering the chance for duplication as well as the overall juice that you get from just a single monster. It's around like 200 to 240. My wilt proc rate was actually pretty low here. It's around 2.4% less than what it should be, which is 10%. And overall, my life force per map was 2.6k, which is a very nice value when you're considering life force being close to 33 to 36 chaos, per chaos. The standard deviation, of course, though, is quite high, and that is because some maps you'll just get fewer plots, and sometimes you'll just get overall fewer juice because there's not as many duplications. When we look at the number of plots here, we see we got an actually pretty decent split. We got 15 5 plots, which again I think is a little high, but it's actually relatively normal considering we take the node that gives us an extra chance to get an additional plot. The 4 plots and 3 plots are relatively equal, which again is expected. I tracked seeds and life force from each map, as well as the number of wilt procs and the number of plots. And my atlas for this strategy is as seen here. I wanted to minimize the amount of purple and blue plants and really go for as many yellow as I can. I took all the modifiers for pack size and quantity, and then I took all as many quantity nodes while speccing into shrines. This is a full-on harvest strat, so there are no other mechanics in my maps that I'm even concerned about besides essence, which takes little to no time. Now, let's take a look at crop rotation. Crop rotation had a relatively disappointing start. It took me around 33 maps to make back what I invested, which is very bad. It started surging up a bit better later, but at the same time, it was kind of disappointing to see considering how lucky I had been like from league start farming this strategy. However, the profits end up still being pretty good. So the initial investment's a lot lower because we're buying purple sextants. We don't need yellow sextants, though you can run them. It's just going to increase the risk of having a harvest with nothing but yellow, and that's going to break your harvest essentially. So I take a purple sextant and then I block as many purple as possible on my atlas, and I'll show that in a moment. The scarabs cost me a little bit more this time, but same old, same old. Same cost for map device, same map rolling, and the return on this was 120k life force, which is notably less, and overall also like over 1000 chaos less in 60 maps, which resulted in our divine per map being 0.159 as opposed to 0.2-ish. So this is actually a relatively large amount. In total, we made a little less than 3 divines less compared to traditional harvest with crop rotation. And so I kind of wanted to bring the point over to the seeds. When we look at the number of T3 seeds, we had about 60 less seeds, T3 seeds, and 3 less T4 seeds. This one is actually particularly surprising because T4 seeds were extremely common when I was doing crop rotation in the past, but at the same time, it's kind of RNG getting a T4 seed because you need a double proc on a plot. T3 seeds, however, were a little interesting, and this again is RNG as well as one other variable I'd like to point out, which is the number of 5 plots. So I only had 6 5 plots in all my testing, which is extremely low for harvest. Like, this should be around 10, I would say. And a 5 plot, if I can show the data here, makes about 4k, 4.5k life force, sometimes a little less. But when you get like a 3 plot with crop rotation, you end up with values under 1000 life force sometimes, which is obviously very bad. And the number of total plots also was lower, so this could be a factor of RNG that's causing this lower life force drop as opposed to just it being a bad strat. But at the end of the day, RNG is also part of the strat, so you can evaluate that as you will. The wilt proc rate is a perfect 10%, which is nice to see. This means that it kind of offsets the less plots. However, sometimes you'll get a wilt proc at the end of your harvest where the plant that you use to build up the other ones is the one that gets the proc, and so it's kind of worthless there. This has an even greater standard deviation in relative to the mean per map, so it's kind of expected here because there's so much variability. Like some maps with 5 plots or 4 plots, you'll get an absolute insane amount of life force, and other ones you won't get any life force at all. And this just comes down to the overall mechanic and the fact that you have a chance of proccing a seed upgrade. And so I wanted to analyze if this difference between the two was actually significant statistically. I just used a one-way ANOVA, and it turns out that, yes, it is significant. The difference between the amount of life force gathered between traditional harvest and crop rotation is a significant difference, and as such, I believe that traditional harvest farming is going to net more overall life force compared to crop rotation. just from this specific sample test. Now, what can we conclude from this, right? Crop rotation ends up being this strategy where you're kind of gambling a little bit almost when you actually put sextants in. So the situation comes where you have a sextant charge consumed on a harvest that is very bad, like a 3-plot harvest, and you don't get any wilt procs. That's not ideal, and you've just now wasted approximately 15 to 20 C in a sextant charge. And not only this, I was doing crop rotation back when sextants cost around 20 to 30 C each. And so it was a lot cheaper compared to now where they're upwards of 90 to 100 chaos each. Meanwhile, traditional harvest farming is relatively consistent and it almost always nets you a decent amount of profit per map. And sometimes you might get unlucky, but overall, you're always going to be profiting over the sample of like even 10 maps. There are some things that I could have controlled better, but I chose not to just because I felt that they either covered cost of map rolling or they didn't affect it nearly as much. But quant alters was one of them, where sometimes I might have gotten a lot of quant alters, and sometimes I may have gotten not so many. And this could have affected the overall life force I got. I don't think it's as big of a deal when we also have sample data on plots, but it's still relatively significant there. 5-plot count is a little strange this time for crop rotation, but I'm not going to count that as the sole reason why crop rotation resulted in less profit. I will just say that it is something to keep in mind where if you do end up getting a lot more 5-plots in your tests or in your mapping in general, then obviously you're going to be profiting a lot more because plot count and wilt procs matter a ton with crop rotation. And of course, with all PoE spreadsheet stuff, it's always going to be way too small a sample size to draw definite conclusions. I think it's a nice way to look at it from a more numerical standpoint, but at the end of the day, it's not going to provide you with a definite answer of yes, crop rotation is worse than traditional. But I will give you my take on it, which is that crop rotation is going to be better suited for Alpengo, where if you encounter a harvest and you see that it has only 3 plots or it has bad colors, etc., you can just choose to leave that and not even do it. And it's if you don't put sextants in and if you're not playing 7th gate, you don't have to even like pay attention to it. You lose nothing except maybe the opportunity. You lose nothing from ignoring it. So the Atlas tree for crop rotation is specking a lot of like harvest nodes. But if you go Alkengo, you can cut out a lot of these nodes. You can just like block out one type of seed that you don't want, and a lot of these nodes for quant and stuff you can just completely ignore because if you end up getting a plot with 5, you'll build up that harvest and you'll still get an insane amount of juice even without all of these extra unnecessary modifiers. So that's where I think crop rotation should be used. And honestly, I've been seeing some players in hardcore like Ben just using crop rotation to farm life force now. Without any actual sextants, which I think is probably where the strength of this strategy is going to be. Now, that being said, if you want life force, go traditional harvest and play a consistent route. I think that it's going to give you a better way to also target farm if you want a specific color of life force. And that way, even though you're spending more on sextants, you're going to guarantee yourself a lot more. Because when we look at the amount of yellow life force, I had 114k from traditional and just over half of that from crop rotation, which again, I think it's a little weird, but it's because some of my plots just didn't get very lucky with the amount of yellow plants, even though I was blocking out all purple. So I think that in general, if you're going to juice up harvest, just run traditional, ignore crop rotation. But there is the caveat where crop rotation, to me at least, is a more engaging mechanic. You actually have to think about like how you're building up plants, and I actually find that a bit more fun. And so if you want that part of it, you're not going to be losing too much per map in terms of profit. You're giving up a little bit, perhaps, drawing from this data alone. but that's maybe a price you're willing to pay in order to enjoy the mechanic a bit more. Because traditional harvest is just go to a plot, see which one has more T3s, and click that one. So in conclusion, I think harvest is a relatively good strat for currency, and I believe that crop rotation should still be kind of explored more, see what interactions you can find with it. I think it's overall worthwhile to play it and try it out if you haven't and you're farming harvest, because it is a really new and innovative keystone that I think should definitely stay on the atlas. It's a lot of fun. And honestly, if I'm going to keep farming harvest, which I probably won't, I would still probably play crop rotation just because of how engaging it is comparatively to traditional. Thanks for listening to this little analysis, and I hope it has provided some insight into this keystone. And I will see you guys next time.